Good morning and welcome to Daybreak Live on Dominion Television. It's Wednesday, the 25th of March, 2026, and thank you for starting your day with us. I'm unreliable.
And I'm Adebayo Adelabu. We are glad to have you join us as we bring you the stories and conversations shaping the day. This is Daybreak Live on Dominion Television. Stay with us.
Absolutely. Good morning to you, Yemi.
Good morning, Hannah. Well done.
Yeah.
All right. So this morning what we are talking about, obviously, is the Minister of Power apologizing to Nigerians over the poor electricity over the years. And of course, he made mention of quite a number of things why we are actually having these problems. And then he said old and weak transmission lines, the wires that carry electricity from power plant to homes, can easily fail or collapse. And then he also mentioned the power plants to say that we need natural gas to make them run. But then we've not been able to generate much of that, and that's why we're experiencing what we're experiencing. And then he also mentioned that some of the challenges the government have been able to actually look for possible solutions, but some are completely out of control of the federal government. And so Nigerians are bothered to say, if the federal government cannot handle whatever challenges that we're facing in terms of electricity, who then should Nigerians turn to? And then he mentioned something. He said in 2025 the people praised the Ministry of Power as a body to say that okay, they did well, people enjoyed electricity. But then I think, yes, to be very fair now, I think some persons experienced good electricity last year, but then people still complain bitterly. And of course I'd like to take you through a particular headline that was posted last year that speaks to this. And then I think around last year, around January, the Nigerian Labour Congress called for the resignation of Adebayo Adelabu, the Minister of Power, over the persistent power outages affecting the country's electrical infrastructure. So when he came out to say that, okay, maybe majority of Nigerians praised us last year, I'm not sure he's the majority, because people still experience, electricity issues, and I mean, for their businesses, for schools and things like that. And the one more point I would like to mention is, same last year, January, Nigeria Tribune posted that, expect reliable power supply in 2026. Adelabu assures Nigerians. Looking ahead, our focus remains unshakable to deliver reliable, accessible, and sustainable electricity to power our homes, industries, and schools. So he made that promise to Nigerians last year. And of course, this is happening. And then he's been able to come out to say this is not entirely our fault. Certain reasons, are responsible. And then he said it's not our wish to find ourselves in this situation, but it is some factors that are actually beyond our control. And of course, he mentioned that because of the dry season, we are experiencing this. And of course, Nigerians should be calm with him and then just pray that things will get better. And then he said in the next 2 weeks, maybe we can experience better electricity across Nigeria. Don't forget that about a few months ago now, when a particular headline broke that the Aso Rock is said to actually move away from the national grid, and of course we focus on solar panels, and billions of naira were spent on that. So Nigerians were complaining that if the Aso Rock is actually separating itself from the national grid, so Nigerians are maybe allowed to just, or maybe they have no choice than to just maybe pray that the national grid will work. Don't forget, I think around 2024 it collapsed almost every single month, and then 2025 we saw the issues too. Even this year we have also experienced the collapse. So the defense of the Ministry of Power before now is to say that this national grid is old. We've been using it since the early 60s, but then can we keep making that as an excuse every single time? This is 2026. Even nations that are not as maybe let me say rich now in terms of natural resources, they found a way to actually ensure that their people will not suffer electricity issues unlike before. So what is wrong with Nigeria? If we keep making the same excuses over the years, I don't think there'll be any solution. So I think this is the best time. He made a promise to Nigerians, and then Nigerians want a good solution. And the one more thing is the fact that he's going to be stepping down as the Ministry of Power soon, because he's set to contest for the governorship election over your state. So maybe at the end of the day, before he steps down, maybe he can find a solution, because at the end of the day, history will always remember whatever he did while he was in office, even before he decides to step down, really.
Well, different things really from different angles. Particularly, I think I will start with the fact that he apologized. So what does it mean to apologize? If a public servant comes out to say, we are really sorry for what you're going through, first off, I would like to commend that, because a good way to start. If you say something happened in the country and then you can't take responsibility to say, we know there are a lot of things we could have done better, we have not really done so well, but we are moving forward, we are promising our commitment to making all of this become better. And I think that's a good way to start from. But some would also take apology as weakness. You know, there's a school of thought that would say that if a public servant comes out to say publicly that, you know what, I'm sorry, I didn't do this well, then some would take it for weakness to say, this person is probably weak, he's not capable, he's incompetent, but that's not exactly the case. We've seen in developed climes of the world and other nations where, you know, public servants will come. Some would even resign to say, I'm not sure I'm capacitated. I'm not sure I have the competence to run this duty as you expect me to. So I'm going to tender my resignation and I'm going to resign as whatever position you have put me. And I think it's also, now let me draw it back to where it should start from. Adebayo Adelabu is an economist. Is somebody who, if you check his portfolio, you discover he's worked with the CBN, is in that line of economy, right? Which makes a lot of sense. But again, is that enough? That someone knows about economics and maybe money, financial, all of the finances, doesn't mean the person is also knowledgeable enough to handle the power sector that keeps collapsing in the country. That's a question, really. And oftentimes, this is what then I put on the table to ask questions, to say, if we put Mr. Toby, that is already an amazing, you know, back-end person, like a camera person, and all of a sudden you make him the Minister of Water Resources, you know, how do you expect him to function? So sometimes I'm wondering, when we say some people are not competent, I'm wondering why we are even having that conversation, because that conversation should have been had before they were appointed. We have seen a lot of nominations and appointments in this country where people were just given things that they knew next to nothing about, you know, so they get to the job and then the first thing they do is start looking for people who are knowledgeable. Please, I need your help. So what does this mean? You see, someone who is coming into that sector is asking, so what does it mean? How do we generate power? What about generation, distribution, and all of those things? How do we transmit power to everybody? Why do we have national grid collapsing? Sometimes when, I think I remember the last time or the last few times when the national grid collapsed, they were asking questions. I'm not sure he was able to give and I'm not saying this to discredit him. I'm just saying that looking forward, Nigeria should look out for the right peg in the right hole. If it's going to be a square peg, let it be a square hole. If it's going to be a round peg, let it be a round hole. That's what we expect. It's the least we can expect, actually, because there are a lot of persons who have, you know, extensive, comprehensive knowledge about these sectors. Why not give them? Because we know he's a politician. Well, he dropped into politics. And so you might want to say, because maybe he belongs to a party, so he's going to take, and it's high time we started thinking better, to say, if I want to put here me as the CEO of a food business, how much of food understanding does Yemi know? That's one of the questions we should put to the table. I think we talked about this the last time too. There was a case in I think where in Rivers right now. I remember they had a conversation. I mean, the committee, the House of Assemblies, you know, invited some commissioners, and they were asking questions, and you could tell that there's a lapse somewhere. You could tell that there's a bit of, you know, there's a foresight of incompetence, because obviously these people that have been taken to come and become the commissioner for education, commissioner for natural resources, commissioner for sport, these people know next to nothing about these things. And that's one thing, to know it's not all there is to it. What about passion? Do they have passion for the job, right? We've seen a lot of people who have the, you know, they have the head for the job, but they don't have the heart for the people. And you want that. This person is trying to get his job done. It doesn't care who sucks his God. It doesn't care if an average Anu does not charge his phone. It doesn't care if Sulia somewhere does not have a battery to work with. You know, all of that is still a conversation. Do you know how many businesses have been disrupted ever since this issue started again? We cannot even estimate how much of losses we've had in terms of money. Because if you consider that people who are supposed to deliver a clothing line, for example, and they require power to do that, they would not be able to satisfy their customers. And that's a problem. So if we are talking about microeconomy, we are talking about productivity at the grassroots level, how can we sustain this without power? And, you know, I don't know. I'm forced to say some have called him minister of something, whatever they would call him. But, you know, that's not even the conversation. The conversation should be that it should not just be the problem or the responsibility of Adebayo Adelabu. It should be that of the people who even set him up to give him that position. Sometimes I don't know if it's so strange in Nigeria for anybody that is nominated to say no to appointments. Can you say no? Yes, you can say no. I know, yes, you want to try. Oh, I've not done it before, so let me try it. You've not done it before. Are you sure? Look at what is. See, Nigerians are not going to wait till you learn on the job and then deliver. Nigerians want something as fast as possible. They have believed that the moment you step into office, you have been adjudged to know better. You have been adjudged to be competent. So you can't come there and give excuse and say, you know what? I didn't quite see this well from outside. Now that I'm inside, it's a different game, and I'm trying to get my head into it. I'm trying to learn the ropes. Mama, Baba, you cannot learn the ropes again at this point in time. And I just wanted to also bring it back to the fact that when we appoint these people, let it be that we know who we are appointing. Let it be that they have the passion. They also have what it takes to deliver, not just the passion, but also the technical, the educational, the knowledge, and all of that is required for that particular function to happen. Let me also say that the fact that he has apologized, maybe Nigerians should really take it with a pinch of salt and probably just hope that something better will come out from this. And I also want to say that I think I did a study one time, and I discovered there are many African nations who have the power to really offset this electricity issue across the world, and particularly DR Congo. The Democratic Republic of Congo has the capacity to give electricity to almost every African nation because of the water resources they have and all of that. The turbine system is almost natural, so there won't be so much to do. But it's still the same. So if you check what's obtainable in DR Congo, it's almost the same thing that is obtainable in Nigeria. We have a lot of dams that can be used for the better good of these things. We can have power supply. And some people have even complained some years back when they discovered that Nigeria supplies electricity to Chad, to some other countries. And you say you give these people power. You don't have power in your country. What exactly is the point? What are you trying to do? Now, we also understand that it's beyond Adelabu. It's even beyond the Ministry of Power. It's also about some political warlords, the political giants who are interested in bringing all of these heavy plants into the country, generating plants. They have a lot of them, and they don't want to run at losses. So they wouldn't want this to happen. For everything that is bad, for everything that is not making sense in the country, someone is at the tail end of it enjoying it. Someone is benefiting from the ills of society, ills of the mismanagement, and all of the issues we're having in the country. So we know this is not just an Adebayo Adelabu problem, it's a general problem. But again, this can have an outlook on his ambition, his gubernatorial ambition come 2027, because some have already said, if you're not competent enough to deliver power, can you deliver the dividends to the people of the states? You know, the state is quite, I mean, you can imagine Oyo State is large enough. You can imagine that Oyo State is about 7 times bigger than Lagos in terms of landmass. So how do you expect to do that if you cannot deliver at that point of maybe just a mini sector in government or in governance? How can you deliver at the bigger one in Oyo State? And that's the question. But that's not even enough to say. But we have to, if we will get to the end of this issue, I remember the discourse and some of their heads came out to say recently that it wasn't their fault, really. That it was the fact that they could not get the fuel. I think they were talking about gas that was needed to also generate too. So there's all of those things. I'm not going to go into all of that, but there's a lot you have to put into the process of generation before distribution and all of those transmission that you do. They said they had shortage of fuel. They could not get. Of course, we can also link that to the Hormuz situation, the Israel, America, and Iran fight. We can talk about that to be one of the maybe factors that are responsible for that as well. To say they did not get the fuel to fuel all of those generating plants to give Nigerians power that they deserve. But again, I'm just going to say, whatever the case is, we should look out for the best hand for the right job, right? The right pegs and the right holes. We need someone who has not just the head for the job, but also the heart for the people. And I think that's where I would like to make my claims.
Yeah, I think you're very spot on. And speaking about experience will always be key in terms of, sensitive positions like this. And then it's been there for, about 3 years now. So even Nigerians are asking if at all he wasn't, very experienced with this particular sector. He must have been able to learn on the job, And the one important thing is when you are asked to take up a position and you don't have adequate information, the best thing to do, if at all you don't want to say no to that position, is to make inquiries. People who have held that position in the past, meet with them, ask them questions, and then of course do not just limit that to Nigeria alone. Go outside of Nigeria, ask them how are they doing it, especially for countries who are getting it right in terms of electricity. Ghana that you mentioned, if you compare the population of Ghana to Nigeria, I mean we are more than Ghana in terms of population, but then they have been able to get it right in terms of electricity. There are some African even some states in this country, they found a way around electricity. So what is going on with Nigeria with that, with the resources that we have? So it's really sad. And of course, he is saying that, the government has been able to invest. So I say it all the time. It's not about pumping money into a particular sector. You can keep pumping money and you will not see the effect of the money that you're pumping. It's about, creativity and intelligence. Before we actually invest this amount of money in this sector, what are the issues? Can we identify the issues first before you pump money? Because there are certain things that wisdom will do for you that money cannot, whether you like it or not. But I'm not saying you do not need money in this particular sector, but can we identify the problem before we now start pumping money? Because why is it that electricity has been a problem in the last 10, 20 years? But I don't think Nigeria has ever had this bad in terms of electricity. And then it's becoming, the situation is more intense because of, the increase in the price of fuel. I think about last 2-3 weeks, Nigerians were complaining every single way you go to in the bus, anywhere. And then it happened that maybe just last week, people stopped complaining. And then I saw a tweet online. Someone said, you people have stopped complaining about electricity at Justice Republic. And speaking to Nigerians that we know how to adjust, to situations. When we had the old cashless policy, people complained, people died because of that. And then at some point, people started adjusting to the situation. So this whole electricity matter now, it appears that so many persons are already adjusting to it. But then I don't think there's any, no matter how rich you are, whether you are Nepo baby or Lapo baby, you must feel the impact of this electricity and the hike in the price of fuel. Honestly, even Band A people are collecting. So it's no longer about whether you belong to Band A or Band B or rubber band. You feel it as a Nigerian, no matter how rich you are. Because I recall I was watching top celebrities, actors, I was watching their videos and they were complaining. Even Peter Duce, he made a video sometimes to say every single day he spends about 40,000 naira on fuel. I'm sure that was then. Now that we have an increase in price, I'm sure he's spending more than that. They are complaining. So if people like that are complaining, we cannot really tell how rich they are, but to an extent, you want to believe that they are more comfortable than the ordinary Nigerians, or let me say the commoners, let me say the students now, who is trying to maybe run a business, they have a small gen, they want to buy fuel, but then imagine, see, it's really sad, but let me say one thing now. Do you know that, $1 might not even be enough to buy maybe 1 liter of petrol? See, some persons are even speculating that it might get to a time. Imagine the highest currency of this country, 1,000 naira, cannot buy 1 liter of petrol. How did we get here? It's a problem. So people are even speculating that if this war does not come to an end, we see back and forth between Iran and, of course, US. They are threatening each other. If you don't open this, if you don't do this, we are going to do this. When are we going to? Should we really base our lives on that? Yes, it will happen. And one major problem that we have as a country is we are more reactive than proactive. Other countries that are still developing, so that developing nation should not really be a huge problem. We are not the first country that will be tagged as a developing country. So we can really be proactive. Can we look at issues and see how we can make them work, if at all there is this maybe war, across the global space. So why should we keep blaming that war? What happens to what we have as a country? What happens to our own fuel as a country? So, see, people are even saying, there was a time they said, let us sell off our refineries and then use the money for something else. If we sell off those refineries now, what about the investment that has gone into those refineries? People were being paid. Contractors were being paid. Why is it so difficult? For the people in this particular sector, in terms of, oil now, why is it so difficult to actually, maybe just conduct meetings with the Dangote refinery? How is it doing it? That is so impossible for us to do it. We have 4 refineries and they are not working. 4 major refineries, and people are saying, let us if not because of Adebayo Adelabu, the recent GCO that came out. Others have not been talking. It came out recently to say that these refineries they are moribund. Let's stop wasting money. But before then, we've been pumping money consistently. But it came out to say, let's stop wasting money. So setting off the refineries, is it the best thing that we should do? I really do not agree. But then maybe it might be the best option. But if we sell off those refineries, where would the money go?
Exactly. So many things. You've made so many points, valid points, and I'm going to probably just start from one of the things you said, Justice Republic, right? Some have called Nigerians that. What came to my mind was Yakubu manage. You know that, okay? You know that. So it's just a way to say we keep managing, right. And that's exactly why we are where we are now. We manage some. We know how to. Adapt. We are good with that. So over people will talk, and then eventually it all dies down. Whatever they do, we'll still keep doing it. So even if they sell petrol for 5,000 naira, a liter this morning. Do you know some people will complain this morning, but next morning they would buy. There will be queues at filling stations.
Because they don't have a choice.
Yeah, that's one. But again, too, it has become a norm that even the government, they know that, let's do it. They will just cry for a while. And we've seen government officials say that. And don't worry, it will still, they will just, after a while, they will calm down. Yes, they know this will be a thing, right? But I know that's also beyond the ability or the power, the capacity of an average person to say, because you did this, we are going to stop working or something. But whichever way, I'm just trying to say that there's a point we need to get to understand that everything lies on every one of us. I mean, not just the government. Everybody has a part to play. And I'm going to speak to the issue of what is happening across the world. We understand, so I read the report. South Asia and some other countries around there began to do some things. They began to diversify. Ever since this whole issue of Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz came about, they started doing a lot of things to say, you know what, let's cut quotes according to whatever we have, right? So they started doing a lot of things. I remember they said they were going into charcoal production, massive charcoal production. They were using some of them. Not every machine will run on charcoal, but some that will run, right? So it's a way to diversify. We've talked about this before. What if Nigeria did not have or does not have natural resources? What if we don't have oil, for example? What would we do? What are we going to eat? But it's possible if we begin to think about how we can get other sources. There are things called biofuels. Biofuels are like, it's what you get from like maybe natural plants or anything that is not exactly the fossil fuel. It's a form of fuel, but it's a better, for example, Jatropha coccus is a plant. You can extract some of the ingredients in it, the oils, the chemicals, and then make power, generate power from it. They can burn, and you can use it instead of fossil fuel. We've talked about this. Climate change is not a joke. We've talked about climate change to be that if any nation would do well, you have to cut down on the emissions. And how do you cut down emissions? You cut down on fossil fuel usage. And that's exactly where a lot of countries have drifted to. Recently, we saw a president, I think one of their leaders in Netherlands, who after having a meeting and then he handed over to the next person, he went on his bicycle. There are countries today that they use bicycles for short distances and they use public buses, not because they cannot have their Range Rovers and all of the big vehicles, but because they knew that if the more cars we have on the street, the more fossil fuel we burn and the more combustion and all of those gases, the CO2 gases that we release into the atmosphere, and that is not even good for us. I think there's a particular place in my area, I'm going to do a study on that as well. Every morning as I'm coming to work, there is a big vehicle, one of the Ajumoshe vehicle, that releases something that blocks everybody's view. You cannot see if that vehicle is in front of you. And that's even a government bus. How do you take it off the road? That's one of the problems we have, right? So I think it's something I'm going to work on, and I'm going to put it out there. We can have these things done better. We can diversify our source of fuel. Until we start thinking about alternative ways of doing stuff, we might still keep getting the results we are getting, because it's been said often and often again that the definition of foolishness is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. That's not going to happen. Now that we have seen that there's a chance, possibly somehow, some way, some issues can come up and then we don't have fuel again. How do we live? And that's what we should be thinking about. Countries, developed countries, some intelligent countries, I would call them, are beginning to look out for alternatives. They're looking for options. What if we don't have fossil fuel? What can we do? Okay, so they're saying, okay, let's use charcoal. There are cars that can run on charcoal. We can build them. We can manufacture them. We can couple them in the country. Right? That's what they are thinking about. When some countries are even thinking of using water, right, to power vehicles, to power installations and all of that. And you wonder, is this impossible? Just the same way some people would never have thought that you can have a mobile device that will call somebody in China. They thought about this. Every great idea starts from a place, right? We can start ideas now that we know that things are going to be difficult much later in the years if we cannot always depend on electricity that is coming from fossil fuel, that's coming from the crude oil that we're getting. We need some alternative, and that's exactly what I'm trying to make as a point. But again, let me also speak to the issue of maybe generally now, to say whoever will come to this sector of the power ministry, even if the person has a good will to make things better, there are still a lot of things that need to be done. And we are also maybe raising a voice to the government to understand that there are certain things we must do. There are things we must ban. There are things we must start, as a country. And I think it's the way forward now. We can't just depend on a savior to say, I'm appointing Oluwayemi Adelabu as the Minister of Power and she's going to do magic. There's no magic coming from Adelabu from there. You can tell because she only has so much to do. She can only do so much. What about the other fact that she might not even be aware of? What about now we've talked about some states generating power themselves. Beautiful, incredible. How do they want to do it? We really do not know. But maybe we don't care really because just get it done. What matters is let's have it. Not how you do it. How you do it, get fossil fuel, get whichever way, solar power, whatever way. Now that we've seen that even some government houses, some buildings are even trying to do solar, trying to do some other alternative ways. And it seems like if they do that, then like you mentioned, that an average Nigeria will suffer because if the grid collapses, there's nobody that will go and run to do it because the government will not know. They are on another power generator. So they wouldn't even know there was a collapse until we make the noise. But, I just want to say, time and again, there's a Yoruba adage that says, if rain beats you into the same house twice, then you are not doing right. Because you have to understand, if it beats you once, you should understand that next time I'm going to get an umbrella or I'm going to come home before time. All of these things. I think I'll also end on this note to say, one of my lecturers came into class one day and then he said something. He said there's no bad weather. He said there's only bad dressing. In a sense, there's no bad situation that will come to a country that's supposed to take you off your foot because you should have planned for exigencies. That's why we have developed nations thinking. We have nations that are thinking, nations that are putting on their thinking caps. They are not sitting down. Nigeria is we are so possessed with every gimmicks and every intricacy of politics. Our our leaders are more concerned about politics, not governance, not the people, not how Nigeria. Sometimes I remember one time the United States came out to say they had a fuel that was going to take them for 50 years. I'm not sure Nigeria can boast of 2 years. Because tomorrow morning, something can come up and say, hey, the fuel price has increased just tomorrow. So we cannot really envisage what we can have in 20, 30, 50 years' time. No, nations that are really serious, they are thinking 100 years. They are thinking 200 years. We've seen, I remember I saw a project that was constructed by some countries in Europe, and it took them 200 years to finish those. So where are those 200 years projects in the country, Nigeria? From 1914 till now. That's about over 100 years. What have we done from there? Were there plans that were set from the time when we got independence in 1960 to this time? Are there projects we've set in place that even if any government wants to say, I'm not continuing, you don't have a choice but to continue? So we've seen policies, we've seen projects that have been abandoned because we do not have a structured system to say, what this system means is it means something for the Nigerian state. If you are going to become the president, you have to understand you have to get as much as money to pump into this business or into this line because we must get this done. And I think it's high time we started thinking about way forward for the country. How can we move on from where we are? And I think that's the right way to go.
Exactly. So one more thing is that the government should not always sweep ideas under the carpet. If at all the idea is not going to fly, there's a way to actually make use of that idea. If it will not be profitable for us at this point, it can be profitable for us next time. I think it's a fine place to leave that discussion. Of course, good luck to the Minister of Power just before he decides to leave the office. Maybe he can just plan a miracle and then all of a sudden Nigerians will praise him again, because that's one thing about people. If you have not been doing so well for a while, the moment you start doing well, Nigerians will still praise